Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. It's another special guest episode. Guys, I'm so excited for this episode. I recently got connected with Dr. Robert C. Smith, and it's cool to talk to a doctor on here. I know I've had a lot of guests over the years, and I feel like mostly I've just talking to the fellow lay person just like me. And I've had people on here that specialize in things and have lots of wisdom and knowledge, and I love that. But it's cool to talk to a medical doctor. He's a new book coming out. And yeah, so here's my conversation with Dr. Robert C. Smith. I hope you enjoy this talk. I guess my first question's kind of like, yeah, maybe tell me a little bit about you and how you well, yeah, I'm curious, like, what made you want to become a doctor? And then I know you have this new book coming out next month. Next month, right? March. Looks like
Yeah,
it's
March
coming.
4th. Yeah, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and the title is very interesting. Be like the kind of thing that, if you have any interest in this subject, you might, walk by and then maybe turn back around at Barnes and Noble and be like, "Hey, let's go check that out real quick." Has medicine lost its mind is the title, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, you just tell us a little bit about like what made you want to help people as a doctor and
sure,
then kind of what's been the transition into this sort of
sure.
book and
No, I was in practice for almost 10 years, and I'd come from a tertiary institution where we were heavily trained in physical diseases and in particular rare and uncommon diseases, and was quite good at it, and then went into practice and found that it wasn't working what I'd been trained in because there were so many people with psychological issues, with mental health problems. And I mean, one patient in particular came in, she had advanced breast cancer, and not much at that time more could be done about it. And I didn't know what to do with her at a personal level. She would say, I'm so tired, I'm so out of hope. And I would simply order a test or something, knowing that it wouldn't do any good, but that it kind of bought me some time. And I really liked her, but I didn't know what to do. And she was a very understandably needing support. And I simply had never been trained in dealing with people like that. And long and short is she died, and I actually was relieved when she died
hmm.
until about, it must have been 10 days or so later, her husband came in and said, I thought you might be interested in the diary she kept. And he beat his way out of there just all of a sudden. I didn't quite get why he left so quickly until I read the diary. And it was just replete with comments about the young doctor. I'd just gone into practice at the time. Must have been 30 or so. The
Okay.
young doctor doesn't seem to know what to do with me. All he does is order more tests.
Hmm.
I don't think he cares. He doesn't seem interested. And comment like that after comment, and there would be another page after another visit when she's seen me, and so on. And that really shook me up. And it was, I mean, several days I just kept mulling that thing over. And it was with that this was not a dramatic change by any means, but slowly over the next 6, 7 years, gradually started to open up to people's psychological and social needs, which I'd never been trained in. And it started to work. I mean, people would say, well, it's nice to talk to you about this. People with chronic pain would come in and say, well, they were doing better. Um, and as time went on, but I also realized there were people who were depressed or who were bipolar or something like that. I had no idea how to diagnose them, no idea how to treat them. And it was at that point that I decided I needed to get more training. So I went back to the University of Rochester and took training in so-called biopsychosocial medicine. And I did a significant amount of inpatient psychiatry while I was there. And it has been since that time that I have stayed in academics at Rochester for a while and then I've been at Michigan State since '85. I retired a couple of years ago, but had been there all the time and got interested then in the psychological and social aspects of medicine. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I've
Okay.
had lots of so-called psychosocial training. But I got into it, and um, it gives me a great deal of empathy for the primary care docs out there now trying to conduct mental health care. They're faced, I mean, about half of all patients in a doctor's office have some sort of a mental health issue.
Right.
We're not trained in it. No, nobody ever thought to train us in this. And so I really am empathic with the
Right.
plight of the doctors who, like myself, are faced with these patients and we haven't a clue of what to do with them. And so we just try our best, like I did and like they do. But it's not enough. And my conclusion was of all of that, that primary care doctors who are seeing something like 75, 80% of all mental health patients
Hmm.
need to be trained in mental health, not to make psychiatrists out of them, but rather to make them as competent with basic mental health issues as they are with basic diabetes or basic heart disease. And when their expertise runs out there, that's when they would refer to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or other mental health professional, just like with somebody's diabetes, if they couldn't manage, they would refer that out, or heart disease. And so we don't want to make psychiatrists of everyone, but what has happened in medicine is that medicine has never trained its practitioners in mental health. Out of all the thousands of hours, and it's something in the range of, it depends on how long residency is, but across 4 years of medical school and 3 to 5 years of residency, there's something like 15,000 hours of training. Only 2% of that is devoted to mental health care. And
Hmm.
that is mainly 5 weeks in the third year in medical school. And even then, it's with very sick, psychotic people, schizophrenic people, severe personality disorders, who are completely unlike the patients they see in practice. And so
Hmm.
that's third year of medical school. Most people now take 3 or 4 more years of residency. And so it's all washed out by then. It's less than 2% of total training time
Hmm.
devoted to mental health issues. And yet, mental health issues are more common than heart disease and cancer combined.
Right.
They're the most common health condition in the US.
Right.
And this is where you come up to the question, has medicine lost its mind?
Yeah. Yeah. No
It
worries.
didn't train people to take care of the most common problem they're going to see?
Yeah.
So I could go on and on
For
without.
sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. Again, thanks for the opportunity to get to meet, love this podcast and getting to connect with people with technology, right? We got this ability to do this, which is awesome.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, some of this does kind of make sense to me, I guess, based on um so just for the layperson. So like psychiatry, I actually didn't know this for a long time, and then I asked my psychiatrist friend that I saw a lot, or he felt like he was a friend.
Yeah.
um, and he's so psychiatry is training on top of medical school, so it's like kind of like a specialty, or
Yeah.
is it like extra
Yeah.
school? Like, 'cause, you doctors
People,
specialize in things.
everybody
Yeah.
goes through 4 years of medical school.
Okay.
People then, after that, take what's called a residency,
Right.
which is 3 years to 5 or 6 or 7 years, depending on what. I took like a 3 year residency in internal medicine. Psychiatry, now this is just out of medical school, those people take a 4 year residency in psychiatry. Neurosurgery, I think, is like 7 years. And so residency is the period of training after medical school where people develop their specialty interests. And
Got it.
so
Okay.
that
Right.
and what's happening is that medical schools are so focused on physical diseases that no more than 2 or 3, 4% at most students elect to take a psychiatry residency, that is, to specialize in it.
Right.
And this is a sad tale, but when students go into medical school, 49% are interested in psychiatry and the psychological and social aspects of medicine. By the time they graduate, that figure, it goes from 49% at the start down to 4%. Medicine does something that beats out the interest in psychiatry and the psychological aspect of patients. And that's because it focuses almost entirely on physical diseases. And that's why so few people go into psychiatry. That's why
Mm.
psychiatrists are in such short supply today. They see no more than 10 to 12% of all patients.
Hmm.
Psychology sees another 10 or 12%. That's why primary care doctors by default are seeing the rest. That's 75 or 80%.
Right. Yeah, it seems like what's so yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is obviously a lack of training, like you were saying, 2% of 15,000 hours, and also this other layer of because I've been a patient in the psych hospitals, and
Sure you have.
yes, there are you know, you learn a lot being in there. I'm grateful for those experiences because I think it's strengthened my empathy and compassion for people because
Yeah.
you do just by default compare yourself to other people, right? You see, you're like, wow, well, at least I have friends and church and family that loves me. So when I leave this place, you learn a lot about people's lack of support, and their um but also, yeah, the hard part is that, so I was going to say to that point, like, yeah, they could be getting the worst of the worst, but most people are not necessarily like in that state. If they're in an episode or they're in a crisis, they might be, but most people are probably would want to come to you maybe before that would happen. But
Yeah.
it seems like the training is the hard part about it is that I've said that talked about this a lot over the years that like you don't see someone's depression or anxiety exhibiting necessarily in like you might not be able to pick up on that from a conversation,
Yeah.
whereas like yeah, it would make sense that the physical disease would kind of um the way you would treat the disease is like you get a blood test or you whatever, but
That's
whereas
right.
depression and anxiety and bipolar is kind of hard. It's kind of hard to prove to someone that they have it. The way that you get to the bottom of what's bothering someone, I think, is that seems to take more time because you got to like have
Yeah.
them take some kind of depression test, right? And bipolar or
Right.
ADHD test. And yeah, there is an issue of misdiagnosing or overdiagnosing people as well. But also, do you think that it sounds like part of the problem is just like, yeah, that takes a lot of time to get
Yeah.
to it, and you want to take the time because you care about people, but then is that part of what's missing? Like the training is,
Well, part of it
yeah,
is
yeah,
the time is an issue is when doctors get involved with something like depression or bipolar, in other words, even though they're not trained, they may have read up on it and they try to do their best. It takes them more time.
right.
But the only reason it takes more time is because they're not trained in it. Once I had gotten training in this, I could see somebody with depression as fast as I could see somebody with diabetes. And so
Hmm.
it doesn't
Okay.
really take more time once you're trained in it.
Got
The
it. Okay.
basic problem is medicine does not train at all, other than that 5 weeks in the third year of medical school, which usually is on patients unlike those they would see in practice. And doctors miss probably, I mean, the figures on this are only 25% of people with a mental health disorder, and we know this from epidemiological surveys, they questionnaires and they're very systematic. They know how much mental health problems are out there, and it's in the range of a little over 90 million people at any one time. And so only 25% of those people receive any care at all. And this is in contrast to something like 60 to 80% of people with physical diseases that receive care. Now,
Hmm.
it gets worse because the 25% that are receiving care for mental disorders, most of it's by untrained primary care doctors like me.
Hmm. Right.
Whereas the
Okay.
60 to 80% receiving physical disease care are getting it by well-trained doctors like me or other primary care doctors.
Right.
And so the disparity is just tremendous. And medicine has been warned about this disparity since the 1970s. The Institute of Medicine, later the National Academy of Medicine, have voiced this and said you need to start training your doctors in mental health care. It's the most common problem they see in practice. No result. Other people have called, and there's an article, it's back, it must be in 2001 or two. It says primary care is the quote, de facto mental health care system, which is
Hmm.
simply reflecting on the fact that most mental health care takes place there, albeit inadequate. And so this problem just goes on and on. It just gets worse and worse. Then along comes, it's already a crisis before COVID. Now along comes COVID, and it triples to quadruples some of the mental health problems. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
this is just a screaming, rip snorting scientific and ethical and moral emergency. But medicine is ignoring it because they are so imbued in the physical disease approach to medicine. And we can talk more about that, why that happens, if you like.
Yeah, I think yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I get what you're saying now. It's not necessarily, you're saying once they're trained, kind of like anything, right? Practicing, it's something your senses get stronger in seeing it. And and then, yeah, the people who are going to the doctor, it's mostly the primary care doctor. And so primary cares are able to, because I've seen my primary care doctor for psychiatric stuff too, and it definitely seems to be better that I go to the psychiatrist. But are they able to prescribe
Oh, sure. No,
psychiatric? They are. Okay.
primary,
Right. That's what I thought. Okay.
all physicians can prescribe psychiatric medications. And one of the problems has been is that they're not trained in doing this. But untrained drug representatives provide a major source of quote training of primary care and other medical doctors when they are pushing drugs. Unfortunately,
Hmm.
they are trained in either drugs or in medications or in medical patients. All they want to do is sell drugs. And so this is how doctors have ended up unwisely prescribing, say, benzodiazepines like Valium
Oh yeah.
so prolifically.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are terrible drugs to get hooked onto. This is where the opioid epidemic came from.
Right.
Opioids were presented as safe and the answer to pain. Well, 200,000 deaths resulted from overdoses on opioids, all prescribed by uninformed and uneducated physicians. And so, I mean, the story just goes on and on. Suicidal patients, almost half of all suicidal patients see their doctor within the month before they commit suicide. Severe alcoholics, 70% of them see the doctor within 2 weeks of the time they commit suicide. Doctors are not trained in recognition of suicide, much less what to do with it. And so it just goes right over their head. And these are deaths
Right.
that can be prevented. Not all of them, certainly, but
Right.
doctors need to be trained at least to recognize a suicidal patient and refer it. But they don't even have that.
Yeah.
And when you talk to deans and program directors and medical and residencies and so on, they'll say, "Oh, we do train people. We give lectures on suicide and we give lectures on opioids."
Right. Yeah.
Lectures don't cut it.
Yeah.
You need you need
Right.
supervised training in mental health disorders, just like they get supervised training in diabetes and heart disease and stroke.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think I heard you say that on something I was listening to you, and like the lecture is, I mean, even if you're like super smart, it's like I feel like taking in, you know, 3 hours of a lecture is not the best way to learn. I mean,
Yeah,
it's definitely like, whatever, test your like listening skills and
yeah,
your note taking,
yeah.
but
Your cognitive understanding
right.
is important. You have to have that. But that's only about 10% of your
I was
success.
gonna say, yeah, that's
And to
not,
just get cognitive
yeah,
understanding doesn't cut it. You
right.
need experience seeing patients and supervised by somebody that knows what they're doing. And that's how all physical disease care takes place. And that's why doctors have been so successful with that. I'm not opposed to physical disease care. It's been very successful. We just
Right,
need
right.
to add mental health care to it.
Yeah, well, it does. It's interesting that you go back to the 70s, and I do want to hear what you think about the mind body split thing, because I
Sure,
started hearing you talking about that on the stuff I was listening to you, and then I know that's a chapter in the book. But
sure.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you were saying it was going back to the 70s, because I do think as time has gone on, obviously in the last um you know 20 years for sure. I think
Yeah,
because of the internet, and obviously there's pros and cons to social media and technology, right? But there does seem to be more of a um I don't know, it's like which one comes first? Like are people just have, I think as a culture, more open, even though there still is stigma.
yeah,
And I think because of technology and people being open about it, that you could say maybe that's helped. So, but then maybe people have just always struggled, but then now it's just more acceptable to like talk about. But it sounds like the medical industry here has been, like you're saying, falling behind on maybe knowing about this and then not
very
fixing it.
much so.
Yeah.
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 No, and I mean, if you want to go back into this, I mean, what has medicine lost its mind? We say rhetorically, just kind of how stupid could anybody be to not train doctors for the commonest problem they're going to see?
Right.
Okay, but
Right.
at another level, has medicine lost its mind? And the answer is yes, it lost it. Back in the 16th century, this is the origin of the so-called mind-body split. And from the 16th and 17th centuries, this is when the scientific revolution took place. Prior to that time, the church had just run everything with an iron hand. They dictated what happened in all society,
Hmm.
these so-called dark ages of medicine, because and no progress could help. But now in the scientific revolution, medicine was starting to ask for more uh, activity. And they appealed to the Pope. His name is Pope Clement, and this was in 1537. Up
Okay.
until that time, I mean, human anatomy, dissection of the human body is the basic science of medicine at that time. But the Catholic Church had prohibited dissections. And so medicine relied on dissecting goats, pigs, cows, and so on, and inferring that what they saw there was what humans were like. Well, at this point, the scientists of medicine pushed and pushed, and the church finally relented. Said, okay, you can do dissections of the human body for teaching and educational purposes, but with one proviso: the head must be decapitated and turned over to us for burial. The head is the source of the soul, the spirit, and the mind.
Hmm.
That's our province. You get the rest from the neck down. that launched the so-called mind-body split. And then come in the next century, Descartes and a host of other philosophers like Hobbes and Locke, they philosophically established that the mind-body split should take place.
Hmm.
Descartes' famous, I think, therefore I am, and the
Right.
mind was just totally unrelated to the rest of the body and was off base. And other people in a little more jaded look at it say what these philosophers did was just a compromise with the church so that the church could keep the mind, the soul, and the spirit. Medicine got the rest of it. And that, in fact, is what's called the mind-body split and which governs medicine yet today. And it
Hmm.
went up through the ages and so on, and to modern medicine. All the benefits you see in modern medicine come from this isolated focus on the physical body. But what has happened is that through the last century was the pinnacle of so-called isolated focus on diseases, many acute diseases, diphtheria, tetanus, all of those acute problems, pneumonias and TB and so on. All of these were cured or controlled at least by the medicine in the 1900s, such that life survival increased from 40 years in 1900 to 80, nearly 80 years by the end of the century. Dramatic improvement. There's no, medicine has done a fantastic job with its physical disease focus. But
Hmm.
as it cured and controlled all these acute problems, chronic diseases surfaced and mental health problems surfaced. They had been there before, but people were dying in their 30s and 40s, and so it was less prominent. And so now medicine is faced with mental illnesses is the most common health condition, and chronic diseases in equal amounts. Now, it's obvious why the mind-body split ignores mental illnesses, which is what medicine does today. 2% of training is all it goes to. What people often don't understand is that the psychological and social aspects, emotional aspects of medicine that it ignores are crucial in chronic diseases. 17% of all people with chronic disease, and these are people typically with severe chronic disease, advanced diabetes, advanced heart failure, advanced emphysema, and the like. These people, because they are so ill, become depressed
Hmm.
or anxious or
Okay.
start taking narcotics and addicting medications. Medicine does not recognize these psychological, social, and mental health dimensions of that. And so those people with these chronic diseases do not improve unless the psychological and mental part is treated.
Hmm.
But medicine doesn't do that. The figure on it is something like no more than 10 or 12% of all these people with co-occurring depression, say, and diabetes or COPD. No more than, even though they're all depressed, only 10 or 12% ever get treated. And that means the disease itself does not get treated.
Hmm.
And it goes on with chronic diseases where it's a problem. And I'm talking all the standard diseases, and 80% of all health care today is in chronic diseases, strokes, heart attacks, cancer, what have you. It has been shown that virtually all chronic diseases, 80% of heart disease specifically, and diabetes, 40% of cancers can be prevented
Hmm.
if one prevents the so-called lifestyle factors that cause them. Cigarette smoking, alcohol
Right.
use, not exercising, eating too much, and so on and so forth. All of these are all psychosocial, psychological and social risk factors. Medicine ignores the psychological and social. And so instead of preventing these problems, medicine waits until they occur and then treats them. And so it is estimated the healthcare budget is something like nearly $5 trillion now. Remember, I said chronic diseases, 80% heart disease and strokes and diabetes can be prevented. What do you think would happen if we prevented half of those? You could save $1 to $2 trillion a year. But medicine is not interested in prevention because it involves the psychological and social issues that they ignore in the first place.
Hmm.
So I can go on and on.
Yeah, yeah. That's no, I mean that's super interesting. I mean the well, to the point that you just made about the chronic disease, that makes sense that anything that would be, hindering your ability to function
Yeah,
as a human just would come with a certain amount of anxiety or depression because I think it's like, look, we're made to go out and connect with people and
yeah,
experience the world and be in the sun and sure we don't always make healthy choices with that but the ability to do those things, of course that would make sense that the
yeah,
chronic, but I guess part of the question would be with the split because it's interesting is like what well this is a big question because this is what lots of people ask, right? And I don't know if anyone knows 100%, right? Or maybe no one can know anything 100%, but like what do you think is the cause of mental illness, right? Because there is the idea of it being split and then it seems like that affects how you treat it, but I think if you just ask the like an average person on the street, they would say, well, it's some kind of chemical imbalance, like something like depression, for example, is a lack of serotonin. Serotonin makes us feel good,
yeah,
right? Maybe low dopamine that we can get naturally from exercise, from sex, or from other things. But so, like, is part of this conversation just not knowing there's the training how to help someone, but do you think some of it's like yeah, what is your opinion as a doctor? Like, what do you think is the cause or causes of these things?
yeah. I mean, one of the problems, and you're hitting on a key issue, is this physical disease focus that medicine has. And that's what we're talking about already:
Right,
heart disease, cancer, and so on.
right.
Has also infected, for pardon that term, psychiatry.
Okay.
Psychiatry has been leading an endless and fruitless search since the middle of last century to find brain diseases that are causing mental illnesses. They've not found any, but they keep trying. And this is what you keep reading about the Genome Project. That was all, everybody thought that's going to find the answer to this.
Hmm.
It hasn't. They're finding all sorts of genes that are associated with things, but they're also associated with other aspects of the body. And so, long and short of it is, there have been no disease causes of mental illness that have been identified.
Hmm.
Now, many people feel the brain is an information processing organ. It is different from other organs. It's processing information. It may not ever develop the diseases that they're looking for. To be certain, there are brain diseases like tumors and strokes and the like, but that's not what's causing mental illnesses. Others think there may be an evolutionary basis for it. Um, for example, people who have been abused as children and become anxious and so on, as they grow up, they learn to be anxious and depressed. Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, that may not be such a bad idea. Be
Hmm.
anxious and on the alert to stay away from the abuse. Be depressed and get away and wait for a better time.
Hmm.
And so it may be that some of these have an evolutionary dimension that is perfectly understandable given the circumstances by which the child was raised. And abuse is one of the primary examples where this is looked at.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is complicated, and I think trying to split things apart doesn't really work, right? Because it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, you could be, I don't even know how to say this, mentally like healthy, like meaning like your, uh, if you were going to a therapist and it was like cognitive behavioral therapy, it's like you're having good thoughts about yourself, you have high self-esteem, like there's nothing in your thoughts that's wouldn't be bringing you down, but then in your body you could be like eating bad, low nutrition, and then that's creating some kind of chemical storm in your body, and then over time it's like if doesn't get addressed, then that's gonna like creep into some kind of like mental, because there does seem to be a lot of people talking about lack of nutrition
Mhm.
in our food, especially in America, as much as it's like, we love America, US of A, we eat whatever we want. Or, I mean, like, we have the resources to, well, I don't know if that's the right, or like the opportunity to eat many different things, and we can obviously choose
Yeah.
to, you know what I mean, eat like Taco Bell versus like
Yeah.
cooking
Yeah.
healthy.
I
So,
mean,
yeah,
let
yeah,
me give you just a figure
yeah,
on
sure. Yeah.
prevent how medicine ignores prevention. Obesity, as you probably know now, is something like 50% in this
Right.
country.
Right. Yeah.
Overweight takes it even higher. Only 15% of people were obese in 1970. So it's gone from 15% to 50%.
Wow, that's a
And,
lot.
and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
why doesn't medicine focus on that back in the 70s and prevent the obesity?
Right.
And you made that's just an aside that I figure that I think is important to illustrate it. You also made a comment that's important. Let me amplify on that.
Sure.
Is that psychological and social also are not enough? There is the physical. They all go together.
Right.
And my mentor and teacher, when I left practice and went back to Rochester, George Engel, identified the so-called biopsychosocial model.
Right. Right.
And it integrates the biological part is the disease part, the psychological is the personal part, the social is their environmental part. It's a biopsychosocial model. And it contrasts to what medicine still does today, just the biomedical model focused on just physical disease, but ignoring the psychological and social aspects. And Engel identified this in 79 or 77, and it has been given nothing but lip service since then. Now, this reflects a so-called, from a science standpoint now, this is a systems-based approach. And systems approach in general means you consider all parts of the problem, not just one part like medicine does. Now, all sciences began back in the 16th century, just like medicine, in the scientific revolution, in a with an isolated focus on one or two parts. It's called a reductionistic approach. But
Okay.
all science, every other one, from physics to chemistry to ecology, have adopted a systems approach over the last 100 to 150 years. All sciences have adopted this except medicine. Medicine is, in this sense of understanding, is conceptually bereft. It has been highly successful with its biomedical model with physical disease, but that has worn out its welcome. It is time to add the psychological and social dimensions. if we're going to take care of nearly 100 million people with major mental disorders and all of these chronic disease people with mental and other psychosocial lifestyle issues, medicine has not done that. It is conceptually arrested, and it's time to change. This is why I'm talking to you and writing a book. The
Yeah.
public,
Yeah.
the public has to get involved and insist medicine get straightened out. It's completely off the tracks right now.
Yeah, so what I mean this is all just yeah, very important things. I think it's like so many people are struggling, right? Which is I think you said that at the very beginning of the book like, yeah, these I mean, yeah, I have so much empathy and compassion and I've struggled myself too. These kinds of things can be so just like when your symptoms are not yeah, not being stable, however you want to say it, right? When things feel out of control, when you don't feel like you're in control of yourself, and yes, this the idea of suicidality, people having the
Yeah.
thoughts and um, not getting the help that they need. I mean, once the mind is in that dark place, it's very hard to, so there's just yeah, lives are I think are at stake here. But what do you think? I think this is probably in the book that you're. I'm sure you're ending the book with like laying out your case here for all of this stuff. But like, yeah, what is like your yeah? How do you think that this stuff can change? Like as far
Here,
as the training and
yeah,
all that. Yeah.
good question. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not enough to just complain. You've got to offer a solution.
Right. Right.
Now, the intellectual solution is already there in the biopsychosocial model, and then some of the work that I and others have done in what's called a patient-centered model, which is needed to activate the biopsychosocial model. So everything is ready to go. We know what to do if medicine would do it. You teach a patient-centered biopsychosocial approach to medicine. Medicine's not going to do that on their own. They just show no evidence of changing. And basically, they are brainwashed, to use a graphic term, with the so-called physical disease only biomedical model. Accordingly, if they are conceptually arrested in that, the public needs to get involved and insist that instead of continuing off the tracks, they come back and address the public's needs rather than their own now erroneous but previously successful direction. And again, mental health disorders are completely ignored by medicine. 50% of all patients, chronic disease, 80% of all patients.
Hmm.
These psychosocial aspects are ignored. Okay, the solution to this, in my opinion, is to conduct is for, say, a presidential commission, a congressional commission,
Hmm.
National Academy of Sciences, somebody to conduct a review of medical education. And the centerpiece in all of this is medical education. That's where this brainwashing gets perpetuated. They only train 2% in mental issues and 98% in the rest.
Right.
Everybody's going to buy into the 98%. Okay, so that needs to be addressed. What this commission would do is it would investigate all medical schools for how scientific they are according to the understanding of modern science, which is a systems-based perspective that I talked about. And they, of course, will find medicine wanting. They will then make recommendations that medicine now begin to actively teach much more psychological, emotional, social, mental health medicine, and not train separately in it, but integrate it with physical disease medicine throughout training. not just 1 year, one course in the third year of medical school, but throughout in every clinical rotation they take and throughout in their residencies. It is only in this way that this is going to change. And it's a big task. What's the benefit?
Hmm.
People, homelessness is decreased, incarceration is decreased, and job satisfaction is greater. There's fewer divorces. School performance is better. There are no drug overdoses from ill prescribed opioids. There's no addiction to benzodiazepines that doctors don't know how to use. Um, maybe I mentioned before, going to save $1 to $2 trillion a year by preventing some of these chronic diseases that we now let flower forth and then treat. Why not prevent 80% of all heart disease, strokes, and diabetes, 40% of all cancers? Medicine does not do that. These would happen. And the other thing that will happen in all of this, I'm sure you'll understand this because I just been talking about it. Medicine will become fully scientific according to a systems perspective, but more importantly,
Hmm.
medicine will reclaim its own soul. Medicine has lost its soul in this isolated focus on physical disease that ignores the personhood of the patient, ignores the very person who the patient is and their social environment.
Hmm.
The medicine will reclaim its soul in doing this as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate. Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, I appreciate you sharing and just this conversation. I feel like we've been talking almost an hour, I think, or close to it, and I feel like we've been talking for like 5 minutes, which is fun, right?
Yeah,
I
good
guess
time.
that
You
happens,
ask
but
good questions.
yeah, thanks. And I know probably ramping up for this book, so this isn't, you've been probably talking to lots of people, which is awesome. And yeah, I mean, I think like to the point, it's easy to feel hopeless, right? Like in a position
Yeah,
that you're in, as feeling hopeless, like as a doctor and all this time that you've spent in your life studying and helping people. And then it can be easy to be hopeless as like someone like me who is relying on doctors and people to guide me. But like even you using the word soul is interesting because it's like, yeah, that's the human part of this, that's the
yeah,
relational part, that
yeah,
is the part of like
yeah.
to your
Medicine's lost its humanity.
yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people do f- to the point of like have had bad experiences with doctors, and to some extent, right, it's not like if the primary care, to your point, is not trained in these things, that seems to be a setup for a bad experience because
Yeah,
they're not able to,
yeah,
and you can still have it with the psychiatrist, but like
yeah,
that seems to be a setup, and then that can make people. I mean, look, I think if someone's desperate, they'll go get the help and swallow their pride and get over the stigma. But a lot of people will, yeah, have the bad experience and then just say, I'm never doing that again. But maybe it's partly because of what
yeah.
you've been saying. They don't have the training to have
I
some
would,
empathy. Yeah. Yeah.
I would encourage your listeners and viewers
Yeah.
to not blame your doctor. They're doing exactly what they've been taught. In fact,
Right.
they're doing a yeoman job in spite of the way they've been taught. They're working hard at it, and they do establish some relationships. And so it's not their fault. They're doing the best they can do.
Right. Well, yeah, and blame doesn't really help you get better. Right? Just
No,
with anything. I mean, you got to kind of get over it if you want to get to a place of stable. But yeah, I like you using the word soul and obviously humanity as well. I always ask people, I mean, usually it's maybe a little bit more in the category of someone who's maybe sharing personal experiences of struggling, but what final words of like hope would you give to people? I mean, you're kind of already saying stuff that
Mm.
is in the hope category if they change, with kind of going in like the systemic political way,
Yeah, we need change is what I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
And go to my website,
Okay.
robertcsmithmd.com. Make sure the MD gets on it because there are too many Smiths otherwise. But
Gotcha.
it's robertcsmithmd.com. On the very first page when you come in, and the second item on it is a place where you can write a letter to various representatives from the president, the surgeon general, to the National Academy of Sciences, as well as your Congress people and senators. Their emails are all in there, and there is a sample letter. All you've got to do is follow your nose. You can add your own personal issues in as well. There's a sample letter in there that requests an investigative commission to evaluate modern medical education. And once that happens, change will fall naturally.
Awesome. Well, thank you, man. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. I will put your website and any other information you have, in the show notes as well, and talk about that on the show as well. Thank you so much for your time. And,
It's my pleasure.
Red Wings versus Avalanche forever, right?
Go Red Wings. No, you want to Avalanche.
Well, no. So your Michigan State is it the Wolverines? Is that,
No,
wait,
that's the University of Michigan. Michigan
oh,
State's the
no.
Spartans.
Okay, right. But that's a big rivalry too, right? I
That's
think. I
right.
think it is. So yeah, I got to be
No,
careful with yeah.
we're the Spartans.
Spartans. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Don't say Wolverines. So all right. Well, hey, have a great rest of your evening, and yeah, I'll be in touch with your team about get this published soon. And I appreciate your
Okay.
time. Put it on YouTube and everything. And so, thanks so much. I
Take
appreciate your
care.
time. Have a good
Godspeed,
night.
my friend.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Bye.
But
Hey guys, thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you, Dr. Robert C. Smith, for being a guest. I'm so glad we got connected recently. Yeah, his website, guys, is Dr. Robert C. No, it's robertcsmithmd.com. There's a link to buy his book from his website. The book is going to be available to purchase on March 4th, 2025, but I also will put a link to being able to get it on Amazon. You can pre-order it now, so I highly encourage you guys check that out. He has other resources on his website. And I'm so appreciative of this conversation. It's fun having a doctor on. And yeah, I do think we need some changes. People need help, people are struggling, and I'm really glad that we got to have this talk. Thank you guys for listening. And follow me on Instagram. That's where I do most of the posting for the podcast. And yeah, till next time, we'll see you guys. Thanks for listening.